Hi, and welcome to this video on the complete introduction to Excel pivot tables. My name is Ian Littlejohn, and I'm an instructor at Data Insight Training. I'm really looking forward to taking you through this video. In my opinion, Excel pivot tables is one of the strongest features within Excel. It really makes it easy for us to be able to summarize and understand our data very quickly and very easily. So hopefully in this video, you're going to see some very strong points of what we can do with Excel pivot tables. But please be sure to like our videos and also subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch with the more videos that we do. Okay, well, let's get into the video and let's have a look at what we can do with Excel pivot tables. Thank you. Welcome to this video on a complete introduction to Excel pivot tables. So we're going to start off with something that is probably quite common to most of you, is we're going to have a table of data here in Excel. Now, often when we've got a table of data here in Excel, we would be using Excel spreadsheet functions to answer questions. So let's say, for example, over here, I've got my region. And I've got 4 different regions over here, and I've got my sales amount. Now let's say, for example, in an Excel spreadsheet, I wanted to know what is my total sales for each of the regions. Now there's 4 regions, so I could use maybe a table, I could use filtering, I could do it 4 times, get the answers, or I could maybe use an equal sum if formula and get the answers for the different regions. It's only 4 regions, it's not too bad. But let's say we've got over here our customers. Now we've got several hundred customers. Now if I wanted to find out what is my total sales for each of my customers, it would be very difficult to do using spreadsheet functions. So this is really where you want to use Excel pivot tables, is to be able to easily summarize and aggregate your data. Okay, to be able to do that, we've got to make sure first of all that our data is in a format that we can use for pivot tables. And that tends to be that you want each field of data to be in a column. So each of your columns over here you can see is a different field of data. And then each row of data is a record of data. So you'll see over here that we have a record. So for the order ID number 3, all this information is then associated with that. Okay, so once you've got your data in the right format, all you have to do is you can select any cell and just click on the cell, go to your insert button over here and choose your pivot table. This will bring up a dialog box that we can use. So it'll tell me we can create the pivot table. It's got the range of data over here. If your data is actually in a table, it will use the table name for you. So that's fine. That's my total data. You'll see there's about 8,400 rows of data here. And where are we going to create the pivot table? We're actually going to create it in a new worksheet. What you always want to do is kind of keep your source data not in the same place as your analysis. So we're going to put this into a new worksheet. I'm going to click OK on this. Okay, so what will happen now is you'll see that there's a new sheet over here. And what we've got over here is the pivot table placeholder. So this is where the pivot table is going to be created. If I click off this pivot table, you'll see then I actually lose those fields that I had on the right hand side over here. So this will just be a normal spreadsheet area. But once I'm on the pivot table placeholder, you'll see that I get my pivot table fields. On the right hand side at the top over here, we have our pivot table tools. Now when I click on this, unfortunately due to the video size screen that we're recording with, it will go off the screen. But it will open up an option, and if we go down on this, you'll see just over here around this area is a sort A to Z. So this allows me to sort my fields from A to Z. Now you'll see that these fields have come through from your spreadsheet. So each of those columns now has now been named and actually now come across. So very important to name your columns in a meaningful way, because you're going to use those names to actually produce your pivot table. Down here are 4 boxes, really important. These 4 boxes allow us to place the fields, and it will then generate our pivot table over here. So you'll see if we go down through our different fields, we've got all those field names now in alphabetical order. If we choose our region, for example, we can click on the region. Now, because region is actually a text field, it goes automatically to the rows option. And you'll see what happened to my pivot table is it goes through those 8,400 rows, and it will pick up each unique region. So as I said, there's only 4 regions actually in the data source, and it's now displaying those 4 unique regions out of the 8,400 rows. So it will show all the unique values in this rows over here. Okay, we'll also see that just below that is our sales value. And if I select that, you'll see it jumps straight away into my values. And what you'll see is it does a sum of sales. Because we've got 4 unique values for my region, it's automatically going through all my data, and it adds up those 4 sets of sales for each of these. And it gives me my answer as to how much sales is there per region. Now you'll see that this is not formatted really nicely. I can't read those numbers. So one of the things you're going to find yourself doing quite a lot is click on the sum of sales over here. You're going to right click, and we're going to go to number format. And on number format over here, when I select it, it'll bring up your format cells option. Always pick the number option. Well, not always. If you want currency or a different format, you can certainly choose those. But I'm going to choose the number option. I'm going to say decimal places as 0, and we're going to use the 1000 separator. So we're going to click OK on that, and you'll see now we've got far better looking formatted data, and we can easily read that. Okay, so we'll see now that we got our first pivot table. So this is showing me my sum of sales for each of my regions, which is really, really great. Now it's very easy to be able to change this. So say, for example, I didn't want to know what is my sum of sales for each of my customers. What I can do is I can remove my region. So I can usually just drag that into the spreadsheet. You see that it gets an X icon. Drop it, it removes it from the pivot table. If I go back to my pivot table fields now, you'll see that I can use my customer name. Now another way that I can use my customer name is actually I can drag it and drop it into the actual well that I want to use. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to drop my customer name in there. And you can see now, because sum of sales was not removed from the values, it retains the number formatting. So now I actually have all of the sum of sales for each of my customers. So that's really powerful and easy to use. You'll also find that we've got another option over here called my columns. So I'm going to remove customer name. Let's go back to my region. And let's say by region now, we want to see this by, let's say, my product category. Now in my product category, when I drop it into my columns, you'll see now that my product category is used in my columns, and my calculations are now made that my sum of sales for each of my product category and each of my regions is now calculated. So you can put fields into your rows or into your columns. Another option that you can do is just use more than one value. So let's say we remove product category, just to make this a bit simpler. Go back over here. Let's say we put our profit in here. So now we have our region, our sum of sales, and our sum of profit. Again, we could use our number format just to put that into place. Okay, so that looks better. Okay, so this is how we create our first pivot tables using our rows, columns, and values. So far we've seen in our pivot tables that it can easily sum up the total of a field. So over here we've got the sum of sales, or we've got the sum of profit. However, we can use different methods of aggregation. So over here we currently got our regions. Let's say we actually change that and we want to see our different product subcategories. And we're going to drop that into our rows. You can see that I'm using drag and drop, very quick and easy to use. So I've got quite a few more product subcategories over here, and I've got now my total sales that are in the data set that's been shown. But what happens now if I wanted to know something different? Let's say, for example, I wanted to know what was the average sales value, or what was the highest sales value, the lowest sales value, or even a count of a different item. So we can do those in Excel. We can use different formulas. We can use equals max, equals min, equals average, equals count, different functions that we can use within Excel. But how would we do that now with pivot tables? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to remove our sum of profit. So we've still got our total sales over here, but now we want to know what is our average sales. Now the average sales is calculated by the fact of taking our total sales, dividing it by the number of transactions. Now if I drag another sales value down here to values, you'll see then I create a sum of sales 2. So we've got it now. It's not number formatted, so we're going to do that again. We're going to right click. We're going to go to the third option. Please use the third option, number format. Don't use the second option, format cell. If you use the second option, format cells, it will just format the cell that you've selected. But in this case, when we use number format, it will actually format the entire field. So I'm going to say number format, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to say 0 decimal places, use 1000 separator. Okay, so we still got the sum of sales exactly the same as what we've got in the first column. However, what we've got here is a right-click option. So when you're on this field, you're on the sum of sales 2 field, and you right-click, you'll see that we get a number of different options. So we've already seen the number format options. You can actually sort this, so you could sort it from largest to smallest, smallest to largest. Or if you go down a little bit, you'll see that we get an option called Summarize Values By. So this is really useful because this gives us our different ability to do calculations. So over here now, we can actually say we want to do this as an average. So when I click on average here, you can see straight away now it's actually recalculated for the product subcategories all the average sales by taking the total sales divided by the number of transactions. And you didn't actually have to enter any formulas. And you're going to find that that's a really, really big benefit of using pivot tables, is that we don't normally have to enter too many formulas to make this work. Okay, so we got the average of sales, and let's say, for example, we drag another sales down. We wanted to know what was the highest sales value for each of these product subcategories. So what it's going to do is it's going to go through your data set, and it's going to look for the highest individual sales value for each of these product subcategories. Again, I'm just going to number format this just to making it look nice and neat. Okay, so we got that looking nice and neat. And again, I'll just use my right click, go to summarize values by, and in this case, we're going to use a max function. So now we're saying it's a max function. It's going to go through that data set. It's going to find the highest individual value. And what you'll see is actually happening at the bottom over here is you're actually getting your totals. So at the bottom here, we get our total sales. Here we've actually got the average sales for the entire data set that we're looking for. Here we've got the highest individual sales value that is actually in there. Okay, and the next one we're going to look at is the lowest. So if I take again another sales, I just drag it down and again just number format this quickly, and we're going to say just use 0 decimal places again. And again, I'm going to use my right click, go to my summarize values by, and in this case I'm going to be using a min value. So min now will give me the lowest value that is in the data set. And again, you can see for the entire data set that the lowest value was 2. The last one I'm going to look at is a count. So let's say, for example, I wanted to count the number of order IDs. So I'm going to drag the order IDs down. And you'll see that whenever I drag it down, you may see that there's a gray line. This tells me where I'm going to be placing it. So in this case, I can see that I'm placing it after the min of order ID. Okay, so I've dropped it in there, and you can see what it's done is actually a sum of the order ID. So it's picked up as a numeric value, and it's automatically summed that. But I don't want that. I'm going to right click again, summarize values by, and in this case, I actually want to use a count function. So it counts through now all of my data set and finds there's 8,399 rows, and it's now telling me how many transactions there are. Okay, so this table looks pretty good, but if I was to present this to somebody, they may not know what these actually mean. So what you can do is you can actually change the name of the fields. So say we wanted to call this total sales, average sales, highest sale, lowest sale, and number of transactions. Okay, so we've now created quite a table that shows us quite a lot of different information for the product subcategory. The next part I want to look at is if I take my data, is maybe to be able to have an understanding of how does my data change over time. So this is often where we get our different trends from. So say, for example, I may want to see my data over years or years and quarters or years and months and see this different type of data. Now, so far in this data set, I actually do have an order date. So I actually have a date field that I can use. So firstly, let's just clear this existing pivot table. So in our analyze function over here, I've got this option called clear. And in this case, I'm going to say clear all. Okay, so I've got a fresh pivot table over here now. And if I drag my order date down into my rows, you'll see what it will do is that Microsoft now creates a hierarchy from this data. So it picks up that there's a number of different data sets over here, and it actually creates an option where you can expand these. So you can expand from quarters down to years, and you can expand and collapse these. But I'm going to show you a different way of working with them just now. But let's first just get our sales figure because we want to work with our sales. And you'll know by now we need to do our number format just to get that in the right format. So get that looking nice. Okay, we got 1,000 separated and no decimals. Okay, another way that you can work with this instead of expanding and collapsing this different data set is you can actually just press your right click and you'll see an option called group. And when we look at our grouping function over here, it provides us with different methods of being able to group in terms of your years and months and quarters. So let's just start off with say years and select only years and click OK. Now you'll see we've got exactly the same information, it just don't have the expand and collapse options that were available first. Okay, if I go back to my group option and I said actually I want to see years and quarters, click OK. And you'll see that the pivot table now automatically calculates for each year and each quarter what my total sales was. So now we got this actual trend. I could go back here again and I could actually say I want to see this just for years and months. And there we go now. Your years and months calculated with just a couple of clicks there. Okay, so we've got a different years and months now. And you could also say, for example, I only wanted to see my total by months. Now what it would do is it would go through your entire data set and it would now calculate what would happen for each of the months. So this would be useful if you're looking for seasonality amongst your data set. Okay, let's go back to actually our grouping. And let's say we want to see actually our years and quarters. So we've got a years and quarters over here. And it's not too much data that we've got. So let's say we actually wanted to see a trend graph for this. And we'll see under our pivot table tools, we've got an option called Analyze. Under the Analyze option, we've got pivot charts. So when we click on pivot charts now, it will create a chart from the data that is in your pivot table. In this case, I'm looking for a line chart. And you can see now that the first line chart should do the job. So I'm going to accept that, click OK. So we're going to click there and we've got our first line chart. Now, a couple of things you can do. One of the functions under Analyze allows you to remove these buttons, these gray buttons. So I prefer to do that, just gives me a bit more space. And here my legend isn't adding too much value, so we're just going to say we want to see a legend. You can add a new title to this. So we could say sales by year and quarter. And there we now have our trend graph. You could look at different designs that you would want to work with. Also under your pivot chart tools, you'll see that there's different designs over here as well. Or you could change your chart titles and options over here as well. One of the functions is you could add a trend line to this, different types of trend lines if you wanted to explore those. Quite useful functions. So very easy to be able to create a pivot chart from this. Let's just look at another example we can do with this as well. Let's say, for example, I wanted to see by my year and just by my years, what my sales was for my different product categories. So currently I've got years over here. So let's say I took my order date and I moved that into my columns. Now what's happened is I've got now my quarters going across on my columns. So if you wanted to see this by months, for example, you could actually just put it back in your rows, right click on that, go to your group, instead of saying quarters, say by months. Now we've got our months over here, take your order date, put it back into your columns. And now you've got a traditional management reports, which now shows each of your years, shows each of your months, and what your performance has been over those months. So very easy to put together the management reports. And let's say we want to add that product category now in to see our sales by our different years. Now we've got our product categories, so we've got our different years over here, and we can see by month now how each of those product categories was created. So you can see with pivot tables, very easy to create comprehensive reports by just dragging and dropping the fields into these columns. If I change these fields around, instead of having years first, I put years afterwards. You could take your product categories, you could have each of the years listed, and then the calculation per month for that. So many different options you could work with. A really incredible function within Excel is the ability to use slicers. So let's see how our slicers actually work with pivot tables. So let's clear this existing pivot table over here. And we're going to go back to our clear, use our clear all. Okay, so let's say, for example, we're going to create a pivot table. I'm going to use our product subcategory again. And let's use our sales value again. And let's do a quick number format on that. Okay, so we got our formatted pivot table. Let's say I actually wanted to know per region what was the sales. Now, we know that we could take our region and put it into columns. And this would then show me for each of my regions what each of my actual sales were. But let's say, for example, I actually wanted to filter this column to only show the region that's been selected. So let's remove that. And you'll find that up in your pivot table tools under Analyze is you've got an option called Insert Slicer. So when we click on the Insert Slicer, it'll actually show me all the different fields that I actually have within my pivot table. So in this case, we're going to choose our region and click OK. And this will now create a slicer. So a slicer now, when we click on it, automatically filters the pivot table. So this is linked to the pivot table, and you'll see that it actually slices this really easily as I select each of the options. Now what you can do is also use the control key. The control key would select more than one option, and you'll see that it will then select that. Up here you have a filter, you can clear the filter, and this also turns on your multi-select. So when you go multi-select, you can choose more than one option in terms of the options that you want. You can turn it off, clear your filter. Now your slicers, you can have more than one slicer. So let's say, for example, I wanted to know what is the sum of sales for my product subcategories, let's say for each of the regions and order priorities. So in this case, I'll just choose a new slicer, and we're going to choose our order priorities over here. And let's say, for example, now I wanted to know my sum of sales for my product subcategories in the East region with a low order priority. And you can see I can then select both of these together, or I could go south and high, and very easy, each time it is automatically filtered. Okay, so we're just going to remove these slices now. Let's have a look at a different option and see how the slices could help us. So we've just seen how we're able to actually use our pivot tables to give an understanding of how data trends over time. So let's say we've got our year and quarter data and our sales. So we're going to take our product subcategory out. Let's take our order date now, and let's group this by year and quarter. So we're going to keep our years and quarters, have our pivot table, and we've just seen that we can easily create a line chart by using our pivot table tools analyze option and our pivot chart. So in our pivot chart now, we're going to say we want to see line, click line, and we've now got a line chart that we can use. Let's just delete our legend, just remove these buttons over here under analyze field buttons. Okay, now the secret is that the pivot table is actually, the pivot chart is actually being selected from the pivot table data. So whatever pivot table data is being shown here, the pivot chart will show. So if we add a slicer onto our pivot table, it should then change our pivot chart to show the data. So let's say we want to see this by our different regions. So I go to analyze, insert slicer, go to my regions, click OK. Now when I click on a specific region, you see now that I am actually changing my data for the year and quarter and my line chart to only show that region that has been picked. And as we saw previously, we could have more than one slicer here. So let's say we actually wanted to see on top of this also our product subcategories. So I'm going to go back to my pivot table, pick analyze, and then choose insert slicer again. And in this case, I'm going to say product subcategories and click OK. Now you'll see that there's quite a list of our product subcategories we've already seen in our pivot table. So what I can do is actually make this a bit wider. And at the top over here, I have my slicer tools options. So on my options over here, it gives me options like I could change my slicer color, for example. So if you wanted different colors, and there's a few other options you can use. But the one I'm looking for is this option called columns over here. So in my columns, I could say I actually want to see 3 columns. And press enter on that. And now you'll see that it's much easier to actually view all my product subcategories in one place without a scroll bar. So if I wanted to pick the East region and say what was my sales for envelopes, I can now create that combination, and I can now see by year and quarter what that sales was, or office finishing. So very easy to use slices to be able, with your pivot tables, to be able to create very interactive charts and pivot tables. Another really great feature of pivot tables is the ability to add additional calculations to your pivot table. So in this example, I'm going to show you how we could do percentage calculations. So I'm just going to quickly unfilter these and just delete these slicers. You just click on the slicer, press the delete key. Same with your pivot chart, just click the delete key. Okay, with our pivot table now, we've already got the sum of sales. So let's go back to say our product subcategory, and we'll get our sum of sales by our different product subcategories. So we've seen this pivot table already. And now what we want to know is how much each of these product subcategories contribute to the total. So what percentage do they do? Now often what people would do is they would create a spreadsheet calculation and take this divided by that, and you could put that in and add it. But we can actually get the computer to do it for us. So what we're going to do is add just another sales values. We saw this earlier when we were changing the method of aggregation, and we could see we could get averages, maxes, mins. In this case though, when we go to the second sum of sales, we're going to right click. And instead of using our summarise values bar, we're going to look at another function called the show values as. And you'll see there's quite a list of calculations that we've got over here. So we're just going to show a couple of these, and we're going to kick off with the fact of using a percentage of grand total calculation. So when we say a percentage of grand total calculation over here, you'll see that it takes this as the grand total, and it can calculate each value as a percentage of that grand total. So this gives me exactly what I'm looking for. It calculates exactly that this is 14.57% of the total. And obviously with something like this, we could also still link our slicer. So we've seen the value of slicers already. I can put my region back in here. And you'll see that automatically with my percentage calculations, it will be recalculated as the slicer gets applied to it. So that's really powerful and useful to use. Okay, I'm going to let's delete that slicer. There we go. Okay, so we've got our percentage calculations there. Let's look at a couple of other ways we could do this. Let's keep our sum of sales. Let's remove product subcategory. Let's actually use our region, and let's use our product category. Okay, so we've got our region, we've got our product category now, and you'll see that we've got a pivot table, and it shows us quite a lot of data. Now the first part is we may be interested to know how much do all of these values, what is the percentage contribution to this total over here, which is my grand total. So how much does central and furniture contribute to this total? How much does West and technology contribute to this total? So when I'm on this field over here, when I right click, again we're using the show values as, and again we're going to use the percentage of grand total. But now this time, because of the fact that I've got columns, I've got a lot more information that's been calculated. So let's look at this first part over here, which then shows me this first part over here. So all of these values over here actually add to 100%. So we can see over here that central and furniture contribute 8.87%. Technology and West is almost 10%. Over here we've got technology and South is 12%. So we're now seeing each of these combinations over here, how much they calculate to the total. At the bottom over here, we also get a percentage calculation. So we're seeing that furniture contributes 34.34% to the total, technology 40.17%. And again over here, we get our regions, and it's showing me how much each region contributes to the total. So we're seeing that this is 25%. This one's around 28%. So quite a lot of calculations there happening with the grand total. But often what we might want to know is how much does each of the regions contribute to, say, each of the product categories. So in this case, what I could do is I could change my show values as calculation, and we could say I want to see a percentage of column total. So when I choose percentage of column total over here, each column now gets calculated to 100%. So you can see now the contributions of each of the regions to the furniture, or each of the regions to office supplies or to technology. So the calculation has been done a little bit different, and this time it's been done as columns. What I can also do is right click and go to my show values as and say percentage of row total. In this case, again, you can see now for each of the regions, it's now showing me the contribution for each of the product categories. Okay, so you can see a lot of really useful calculations happening here very, very quickly. And again, I could link this to a slicer, and I could use the slicer then to change the context for the pivot table. Very, very easy to do. So far, we've seen how slicers can add a new dimension to our pivot tables. So what I want to show you now is an additional functionality in Excel called Conditional Formatting, and see how that can add value to the fact of our pivot tables. So let's create a new pivot table over here. We're going to take out region and product category out and sum of sales. So let's build one and say we're going to have product subcategory. We want to see about different regions, and we're going to look at profit. Now within our profit values over here, we want to highlight which items have the highest profit and which ones have the lowest profit. But it's not always easy to see when you have quite a range of data to look at. So what I could do is I could actually highlight this data over here, and I could go to my conditional formatting over here, and I could say I want to use a color scale. So let's say I use a color scale over here, and the highest values over here would get green, lowest values would get red, and the middle values would get yellow. And you can see that we've got that very easily highlighted over here with our green, yellow, and red. So very easy to be able to add this conditional formatting. And again, just to show that this would work quite nicely, let's say insert a slicer. Let's use a different one. Let's use customer segment, for example, over here. So we've got a different customer segments now, say for corporate now, and you want to see in which regions and which product subcategories now are generating the highest and the lowest profit. Very easy to use the color then to see how these are used. Now you'll see that my pivot table is jumping around a little bit, and the reason for that is you can change some of the pivot table options. So if I right click on this, you'll see an option called pivot table options. When I select this, it just brings up some pivot table options that you can use. And the one that I'm looking for is auto fit column widths and updates. So every time I'm doing a slicer, it's updating my pivot table. So what I'm going to do is just turn that off. And now when I do my slicing, you'll see that my pivot table stays in the right size. So that's the first use of it, we could say, use of our conditional formatting. We could highlight using colors as to which numbers are highest and which ones are lowest. If we want to remove our conditional formatting, just go to clear rules, say clear rules for, say, from entire sheet. and that would remove it. Okay, let's keep our slicer for now. Let's look at another example. So far we've seen how we can use our date and time, and we can see how we could change things over year and month. So let's do an example of that. Let's keep our sum of profit, and let's remove our region. I'm going to go back to our order date. So let's say we want to see over year and month. Remove quarters, pick year and month. Okay, so now we've got our profit by year and month. And let's say we actually wanted to know what was the difference from the previous month. Now we saw earlier that we had a set of show values as calculations, and as I said at the time, they're really, really powerful. So let's add another profit into the mix over here. So I've got another profit over here, and over here now I'm going to just number format this, make it look better. Okay, so we got exactly the same numbers as we do for the first sum of profit. But in this case now, what I'm going to do is going to right click, going to say show values as. And if I go down a little bit, you'll see an option called difference from. You'll see that there are other calculations that go off the recording screen at the moment, but there really are a nice wide range of calculations that you can apply to pivot table. We're just going to show another example here. So we're going to say difference from calculation here. And what I'm going to say is my base field is my order date, which is actually my month, and my base item over here is previous. So I wanted to calculate from the previous month what the difference was. So now I've got per month what the difference was in my profit. Now that's really good, but what I might want to do is I might want to now show this in a visual format. So let's say add another profit over here. Now I'm not going to worry about number formatting this because you're going to see just now that we're not actually going to show the number. And what I'm going to use is actually a data bar that will show how big or small this actually is. So let's just do our calculation quickly, show values as, difference from. And again, we're going to say order date, previous, click OK. But in this case, when I go to conditional formatting, I'm going to use an option called manage rules. So I'm going to say manage rules over here. I'm going to create a new rule. Now my new rule, I'm going to say that I want to show all cells that are showing the sum of profit 3 value for the order date, which would be this column over here. I'm going to format these cells based on their values. And what I'm going to use is actually something called a data bar. So the data bar, and in this case, very important, I'm going to say show bar only, so the numbers are not going to be shown. So let's say with my color over here, and I want to make it say a green color, if it's good. A negative value is going to be red, so that's perfect. And let's click OK. Click OK and we apply. Now you'll see that straight away now it's showing me this value as a data bar. Negative is a red. So now I get a visual format showing me what the difference from this. And again, because this pivot table is now linked to my slicer, we'll see then that this will change as I change my slicer. Okay, let's show one more example. Okay, so let's go back to this over here. Now let's say, for example, if my profit was greater than $5,000, we're going to give it an up arrow. If it was less than minus $5,000, then we're going to give it a down arrow. And if it was between minus $5,000 and $5,000, we're going to give it a right arrow. Okay, so this is an icon, another way of visualizing your data. So again, we could go to conditional formatting over here. And we're going to say on our manage rules, new rule. And now we're saying all cells sum of profit to for order date. So that'd be all of these values here. And again, we're going to use the format all cells based on the values. Going to go to icon sets. In this case, I'm going to move up and I want to use my arrow bars. So I'm going to say when the value is, and in this case, it's not percent, we're going to use a number. And I want it to be greater than 5,000. And at the bottom as well, we're going to say number. And again, this is going to be a minus 5,000. Okay, so if you read this now, we're saying up arrow when the value is greater than or equal to 5,000, right arrow when it's less than 5,000 and greater than or equal to minus 5,000, and a down arrow when it's less than minus 5. So we're going to click OK. Click OK. And now these arrows have now been applied onto this actual part of my pivot table. So you'll see very easy to actually apply conditional formatting into your pivot tables. And again, when we use our slicer, really gives us a lot of insight as to what's happening with our data. So I'd just like to say a big thank you for taking the time for going through this video on the complete introduction to Excel pivot tables. However, you've seen that Excel pivot tables really makes it very easy to summarize and understand your data. Please be sure also to visit us at Data Insight Training if you have any other training requirements.